students and foster youth. And even though then, as it is now, Black students are the lowest performing subgroup, Black students weren't called out in any way. And I want to go back to you to ask this question, Dr. Bishop. What does it mean for a school system when 3 groups are called out for priority? How does the school system begin to move to provide services for those groups? In this case, English learners, low-income students, and foster youth that are basically triggering $6,000 per student extra for the school districts that they attend. How does the school district start to move once the state signals these are your priority groups?
So the students are written into a plan. When you think about English learners in the state of California, they have teachers who have to hold special certification. You cannot teach English learners without being certified to do so. They have to have time carved out within the day, half an hour or so, to have their specific needs met based on the data. There are special institutes, there are tests you have to pass in order to even be in a room to teach English learners. And then there are goals that need to be met. The district says we want, 5% of our English learners over last year to be more proficient in English language arts. There are goals. And then if those goals are not met, those goals are challenged the next year and different strategies are in tow. So that is what it means. And so going back to those rooms, Dr. Fortune, I remember looking at my colleagues and going, really? We're not fighting for Black students to be a part and identified in this LCFF? Why? You say you know what to do, but historically, we have not seen that. And so as such, this is why our fight in the coalition.
So here we are in this local control funding formula. Director Brown was created in 2013. So now it's a 10-year-old, right? 10 years is always a good time for reflection as we look at legislation to say, how did the implementation go? Now, what I find intriguing, you and I had a conversation and you shared some history with me that I didn't know, which is that Berkeley Unified did something different. And Berkeley Unified, in the local control accountability plan, acknowledged Black students. So tell us what Berkeley did and when they did it and why they did it.
That's an excellent question, Dr. Fortune. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about what Berkeley did. So I'm proud to be a part of Berkeley Unified School District. Just a little history about Berkeley. We were the first school district in the nation to integrate our schools without a court order. Okay, so that just gives a little bit of history about the readiness of Berkeley. So in 2013, when the Local Control Accountability Plan came about, Berkeley decided, well, this is our opportunity to say what our priorities, what our goals, and what our values are. And we saw within our school district that our lowest performing students were our Black students. And so we took the opportunity to explicitly call out our Black students in our LCAP plan. We were the first and only district at the time to do so. And when we called our students out in our LCAP plan, there was also something else that we needed to do as well, and that was to create a board policy that said that this money that we get from our LCFF because of our LCAP plan will go specifically to students. We're not using it for raises, we aren't using it for programming for any other thing else, but we are using it explicitly for students, and explicitly in this time for Black students. And so from that, we were able to create programs like our Umoja program, which helps our students to feel like they're a part of welcoming and culturally affirming environments. We created something called Super Science Saturdays, which focused on STEM, mathematics, and science for our Black students on Saturdays. And because we did that, and because we put our money where our mouth was, because what we were saying is that our Black students are underperforming, our Black students are not receiving support, and so we decided to put the money towards our Black students, and we were able to see incremental changes. Now at the time, although we had a history of integrating, we had a history of supporting our students, we had the largest achievement gap in the nation. Berkeley Unified School District, Berkeley, a very liberal city, had the largest achievement gap in the nation. I just want you to sit with that for a minute. And that's a problem, right? And so we decided that we were going to do something to ensure that our achievement gap did not look like what it looked like. And so we were able to see those incremental changes in our data. And it happened because of a partnership, not just with the Board of Education and with the district, but it was a partnership with our community. So while board members were speaking to the community and saying, this is what we're going to do, I know it's going to feel a little different, I know it hasn't been done before, I know you haven't seen this before, but trust us. We had community members, a group called PCAD, Parents and Children of African Descent, who teamed up with a group called United in Action, and they promoted our LCAP plan all over the city and then ultimately all over the state of California, which then sparked movement across the nation. And so that's what we were able to do for our students in BUSD, and that's what we're continuing to do, because our LCAP is our goals, our priorities, and ultimately our values.
See, that's really extraordinary, because and it does deserve applause. Because what I hear you saying is that you did it in partnership with parents. Were the parents the advocacy that pushed the district to go in that direction, or was it the other way around? Did the district push the parents?
Well, that's a good question, Dr. Fortune, and the answer depends on who you're asking.
Okay.
Right, and so
Success has many mothers, failure is an orphan.
There you go. That's exactly right. But more importantly, depending on who pushed who, it was done in partnership. So one would not be able to work without the other, right? So board members would not be able to have the vote and make those decisions if it wasn't for the advocacy of families. And the advocacy of our families would not have happened if it weren't for our board members like the late Karen Hemphill, who just passed away, and Josh Daniels, who decided that this is what our board is going to do, this is what we're going to stand for, and this is our time right now.
That's extraordinary. And just one more thing before I go to Tinsea. When did that happen? Do you remember the year when Berkeley included black students in their LCAP?
It was the first year that LCAP was introduced in 2013.
Wow. Okay, so let's just get some context here. This is a time when California was saying, because of Proposition 209, which ended affirmative action in California, no public school system can do anything in particular for black students. And right now, what the governor, Gavin Newsom, is saying is that the reason why black students can't be acknowledged as a high needs group in California, not because of their race, but because of their academic performance. So even if you don't call them out by name, he's saying, if the result is that black kids in particular are helped, then it's a Prop 209 violation. But here we have Berkeley, who's been doing it since 2013. And all of this opposition from our Democratic governor is coming because he says that somebody is waiting out there in the wings to sue us. Somebody who hasn't sued in a decade, because Berkeley's been doing this. So now I'm interested, Tinsea, who's a leader in Black Students of California United. One, can you just tell us what Black Students of California United is?
So Black Students of California is a statewide organization that's a nonprofit, and it basically serves to uplift black students, whether that be in their own schools and communities, supporting black student unions on campus so that they have more of a presence on their campus and that they're supported. We also run like our annual conference where we bring students all over from California, San Diego, from the South to Fresno and Sacramento, and we provide that kind of support and community where you have a sense of presence and you're able to advocate for your needs on your campus, and we support you in that endeavor and bringing that encouragement throughout that.
So, Tinsea, I understand, there you go. I understand that Black Students of California United has taken up the fight to get black students acknowledged in the local control funding formula as a fight of your own. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think when it comes to just like supporting black students, it's not always just about like affirmations and uplifting them, but it's also reflecting that in our legislation and in our policies. And so whether that even be local or statewide, I think that's something that truly reflects in the values of BSCU, and that's why we encourage students to advocate for it as well.
So I saw on social media a room that looked like it had 400 black students in it, and Angela Davis was there. So it appears that y'all don't play. Is that true? Did Angela Davis come speak to your group?
Yes, it was actually like the best day ever.
So what has been your involvement personally, Tinsea, in this push to have black students acknowledged as a high needs group in the state of California?
Yeah, so I did learn about it through BSCU, and that's why I think it plays like such a big role in making students more aware of how they can get involved. Because a lot of times I think we kind of let the adults in our, our schools kind of just make the decisions for us, rather than understanding that we also have a say in the decisions that are made on behalf of us, and that it is our education, and we are the largest stakeholders. We are the people receiving it, so we should have a say in it. And I think in regards to, the funding and such, I think, going through the motions as a black female student, you really see kind of where the playing field is not even, and where resources are being allocated and where it's not. And although there's kind of some blindness to it among like our staff, black students really see it, and I think we're kind of blind, like we kind of are brainwashed to believe like, oh, that's just the way it is, that's kind of how we have to accept it, that's been that way, so we just gotta keep going, push it through, go with the flow. And I think with AB 2774, it kind of like gave us a chance and opportunity to raise awareness on so much of the issues that we've seen and have been going on. And so I firmly believe that like black students are able to create such a positive impact to our communities and our nation as a whole. And so if we actually are given the chance and we are actually supported in our endeavors, rather than kind of continuing this systematic and historical kind of push against that, then we'd actually be able to succeed. And that's what AB 2774 and the lobbying kind of brought to attention.
So in terms of your personal experience in school, why is this issue important to you?
Yeah, I think in regards to like my own education, I know for sure that like the staff on campus have the best of intentions and that they do want to see us academically succeed, but it's kind of hard to expect that when students aren't able to be doing their homework, when they don't have the Chromebook that they need, or the Wi-Fi access, or the textbooks and stuff like that. And so I think a lot of times in initiatives where we want to bring equality, black students are kind of left behind, and that really reflects in like, for example, like honors courses and AP classes. I think we kind of just blindsided to the fact that there are so many bright black students, but we kind of just don't provide them the encouragement or resources to actually be comfortable to be in those spaces, because there's not a lot of diversity. The curriculum is not actually culturally responsive at all. And so I think that the fact that this has been the case for so long really encouraged me to advocate for it. And also, like, I have like 3 younger sisters who are in this public education. I want to leave it like at least even a tiny bit brighter than it was before. And so like this is a fight that is worth fighting.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about what would have been the impact if the governor had signed AB 2774, what that would have meant for schools. And I'm following this admonition to speak directly into the microphone, which I'll pass on to my fellow panelists. So first of all, you have to know that this bill got through the California legislature in the last session, so in 2022, with unanimous bipartisan support. It flew through the Assembly and through the Senate and was on its way to the governor's desk when the governor asked the author to pull the bill, saying, essentially, I'm not going to sign this bill because I think there are constitutional issues, which is code for, I think it's a Prop 209 violation. Now, this is interesting because Dan Walters, just recently, a columnist, wrote a story about just how many laws the California legislature have passed that ended up being challenged in court because on grounds of their constitutionality. So, for example, the governor has taken on the Supreme Court as it relates to a woman's right to choose. In addition, the governor has taken on the Supreme Court on the issue of gun control. And when he was mayor of San Francisco, he took on the Supreme Court on the issue of marriage equality. So this is not a governor who has shied away from challenging laws that people have said, you can't do that. So our question becomes, well, why won't you do it for black kids? Especially in an environment where the black vote is often relied upon as the swing vote to win elections. And while the black vote in California is not as strong as it is nationally for a politician that has national aspirations, because we all know that Gavin Newsom is angling to be president of the United States, no matter what is said publicly by his administration, you've got to go through South Carolina. And our current president, even before the primaries were changed, even before the caucuses were changed, had to get through South Carolina to become president of the United States, right? He had to get through, it was Congressman Claiborne that made his political future. But black students are not a group that this administration will actually fight for, which is extraordinary. Instead, they've pivoted the conversation, Christina, to talk about income rather than performance. Because why?
So I want to call this what it is, a structural form of racism, right? And so let's just call it what it is. And everyone is allowed to say all, but if all included black, we would see something different, and we don't. So then when we say, well, all was supposed to include black, but it didn't, so now we're saying in this moment in time in history that we want our children to have what they need to be free from the oppression of the structural racism and actually have learning justice, there's a problem. And that's why the National Action Network is heavily involved in this and also concerned as a civil rights organization, right? And the state of California has been willing to be very liberal in other opinions and outward conversations, but when it comes to black children, there's silence, and that silence is complicit. So, you know, I like what you said, Dr. Bishop, about having grit in this fight, because we do have to have grit, because the enemy is on all sides. When you start talking about black children, and I have 4 of them, so I'm heavily invested in this, then people come from every angle fighting, well, what about all? What about all? Well, why didn't the all include black when it was supposed to, right? And I remember one of the first times I heard you, Dr. Fortune, speak, you said, powerful people educate their own children. And that changed my mind in a robust way about the way that we view this thing. You know, we see other people are able to educate their own children, but when we talk about educating black children, suddenly it's criminal. And so are we under slave codes? You know, you have to ask that, right? Why are we only able to advocate for black children up until a point of someone else's comfort level? So I'm gonna leave it there.
So, Dr. Bishop, what is the practical implication of shifting the conversation for one that's about academic achievement, because black students are the lowest performing subgroup, but instead shifting it to be about income? Because that's what the governor created a proposal called the equity multiplier. And instead of, and he said, instead of $533 million, which AB 2774 would have been worth specifically for black students on an ongoing basis, $533 million. Instead, he said, okay, I'll give $300 million, but I'll allocate the money to the lowest income schools in California who have 85 to 90% free lunch, not even free and reduced, free lunch. So that's the poorest of the poor. So that's only 5% of the schools. And that's the basis on which I'm going to distribute this money. What is the impact of shifting that conversation away from academic performance to income for black students?
Well, you've done the math, Dr. Fortune, and I believe that there are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake, right, that are going away from the black students that we were fighting for and toward students who live in poverty. And as such, that the majority of this money is going away from the very students that we were advocating for. I think the question becomes, I think the question in California right now is, how dare you say black students deserve something different? How dare you? In Vallejo, I would suggest that perhaps we were side by side with Berkeley in saying, we're going to put black students in the LCAP. We're going to fund them because only one out of two of our students are graduating from high school. We're going to say black students because only 11% at the point where I went into Vallejo as a superintendent were graduating with A through G requirements met. We're going to put money into black students because they are at the highest level of suspension. In fact, one of the 10 highest suspending districts. That's why. But it's so much easier, Dr. Fortune, to talk about poverty. It's so much easier to talk about learner status, English learners. Why can't we say black students are not making it? Why? And so that's why I appreciated our action to say, here we are, we've got 2,000 students here, and you need to see who you're not willing to fund. You need to be able to look them in the eye. This young lady spoke eloquently. Look her in the eye and say, how dare we say black? Well, we are saying black. We're not shying away from it. And we'll be back. Whoever is going to sponsor the legislation, they will. And then whoever picks it up, whether it's this governor or somebody else, will be the next president, because they'll say, actually, California, you are failing generations of students, and we want to do something about it. And we're going to support those individuals that believe in all children. And I would suggest one last thing, Dr. Fortune, because I want to honor your father. He wrote books where he talked about strategies that work. There's no confusion. Just go pick up one of those books.
Thank you.
And do what Dr. Fortune studied. There are people doing this work every day. And that combined with the funding, as we've seen with the English learners, the foster youth, the homeless, you can change the trajectory for students if you use those practices and use them well.
So those books are Leadership on Purpose and Closing the Gap, what African American parents and students do. And my father, Dr. Rex Fortune, who recently passed away at the end of January of 2023, studied success. He made it his business to look at the data and see what schools were succeeding with African American students, and then he went and formed relationships with those leaders, and then he brought teams of researchers that he led and researched the practices. So, and we use those practices and make reference to them in the work that we do at Fortune School, in the school system that we've created with 12 schools to close the Black achievement gap by preparing kids for college starting in preschool through 12th grade. So there's a theme developing, and I think this is interesting because I think it's a direction where we can take the Black in School Coalition, and that is collecting all the school systems who did it anyway, who in spite of Proposition 209 and all of this pressure to not do anything in particular for Black students, who quietly did it anyway, because I was quite taken in 2008 with the San Bernardino Unified School District that had developed this program, this policy that was for African American students. It was called TIP. I don't remember what it stood for, but it was for African American students. And I was thinking, because at the time I was working in not this governor's office, but another governor's office, because I've been an education advisor to 2 California governors. And I was thinking, how did they get away with this? Because the prevailing conversation is always, oh, you can't do that. And that is enough, even without analysis, to stop policymakers in their tracks many times. So here we have examples. These are the ones I can name of school districts, Director Brown, who have taken action anyway. You said Berkeley, Vallejo, Los Angeles Unified, San Bernardino, Fresno. That's enough for a hearing. And I wonder sometimes, Director Brown, the locals are ahead of the state in developing policy and it gets rolled up. Do you think that that could happen in this case?
I certainly hope that it does, right? I mean, I wish that it wouldn't have to happen, right? I wish that we had a state that said, this is our priority. We're going to support Black students by any means necessary, because this is what we should be doing, not because they're Black, as we've mentioned time and time again on this panel, but because they are the lowest performing students in our school districts. But what is happening is that these local school districts are saying, I'm not going to wait for the state to do anything for our students. I'm not going to wait for the state to provide culturally relevant and culturally responsive teaching to our students. I'm not going to wait for the state to say that we are over-identifying Black students in special education. I'm not going to wait for the state to say that we are failing our students. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it right now. And so it is my hope that if the state can't do it, there are more local school districts who follow the Berkeleys, who follow the LA Unifieds, who follow the San Bernardinos, and do what they need to do, especially school board members who were elected and called to do this work and do it unapologetically. It is my hope that these school districts lead the way if our state cannot and refuse to.
Well, one of the things that I know for sure is that leaders convene. Absolutely. And so I think this sounds like the topic of a wonderful hearing that perhaps we ought to convene and lead from the daises that we occupy. So I want to stick with you, Director Brown. You're an elected official, and you're leading a conversation at the Berkeley Unified School District Board of Education about reparations. And there's an intersection here, I think an interesting intersection, because the Reparations Task Force for California actually recommended that Black students be added right alongside English learners, low-income students, and foster youth as a part of the local control funding formula. And they did this in 2022 in the same time in which we were sponsoring this legislation. And they weren't subtle. Like, we were subtle. We said, well, not because they're Black, it's because they're the lowest performing subgroup. They just straight up said Black students. And so there became this intersection in this conversation between what we're talking about adding Black students to the local control funding formula and the whole reparations conversation. And I noticed in a story that I was contributed to for Ed Week that Berkeley was called out for its work in K-12 reparations. I wonder if you can talk about that, and I'm going to ask you to pull your microphone up a little bit.
Absolutely. So around 2020, after the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, there were so many community groups that gathered together, so many businesses that gathered together to say, what can we do to support Black people? And so many groups led by Black and African American folks that said, what is it that we need? Because now is our time to act. So during that time, I wrote and sponsored, rather, a Black Lives Matter resolution for Berkeley Unified School District. And that resolution called out a couple of things, but also simultaneously, during that time, I was doing work in the community to see what reparations would look like in Berkeley Unified School District. And so I convened a group of community members, right, going back to the community, pushing these initiatives and these programs that we need. So I convened a group of community leaders alongside one of my former school board members, and we met for 2 years. And we researched and we put polls out into the community, into the city of Berkeley, and we met with so many different community groups who were interested in supporting reparations for our students. And so from there, the community group called on Berkeley Unified School District to create a task force to explore the possibility of true reparations for our students. And just this year, the task force was designed and created. So we are now in the very early stages of exploring reparations, but our task force consists of 6 community members, 5 educators, board liaison, as well as students who are deeply rooted in this work. This is our superintendent's committee. So our superintendent said that this is what she wanted to support and this is how she wanted to move forward. And so now we're looking at the possibility of reparations. So the task force is charged with 3 things. The first is the funding source, where the money will come from and how we will be able to provide reparations to our students. Secondly, it's going to look at the scope and sequence, so how often, which students would be eligible, and some of the similar things that the California Reparations Task Force is looking at. And then finally, they're going to look at timing, when this will happen for our students. And so I am very excited. Berkeley does a lot of firsts, right? So we are the first school district in the nation to look at true reparations, not just for members of our community, but explicitly for our students. Now, there are some other school districts who have looked at reparations, but specifically for programming and allowing more programs and more initiatives to happen in their school district, but that's work that we should already be doing. That is not true reparations work. True reparations is giving money to students that will hopefully change their lives at some point and allowing them to use those funds to improve their lives, whether it be using it as a scholarship to go to college, a down payment on their home, to support them as they start a business. And so that's what we are exploring in Berkeley. So please stay with us, please watch, please support, and please spread the word, because this has to happen, and it has to happen not 10 years from now, but it has to happen right now for our students.
Well, I find this to be absolutely fascinating, and I want to evoke the youth voice here on the panel, Tinsea, to ask you for your opinion, because what Director Brown has talked about has been very student-focused in terms of the focus of where reparations should go. What is your opinion about reparations?
Yeah, I think especially for Berkeley to kind of be leading that force and like that call to action is quite amazing, because as I was saying earlier, like I think a lot of staff and faculty have like that intention of doing good, but that's not really reflected in their actions or whenever decisions are being made. So to like genuinely start that conversation, the task force to actually put in the work and the results into that is quite amazing. And I think, at least in my experience, my school and district as a whole kind of takes student input as in like a survey that they send annually, and it's kind of like, oh, where do you think the funding should go? And then they kind of just use that as like a performative way to say like, oh, we care about your voice, rather than directly engaging with students in those conversations and working with them and alongside them to hear what their needs are. Because I think teachers might have the perspective of like what's going on, but like unless you actually talk with the students, there might be a lot going on behind the scenes that you never knew was an issue or something that needs to be addressed. So I think that's really quite amazing. Yeah.
I'm interested in getting everybody's opinion on this reparations issue, because we all, Black people, stand to gain in some way. I personally take the James Brown approach, which is pay me my money in cash. I actually do feel that way. But Christina, you feel that way? Christina, how do you feel about reparations and you know, where the funding should go and how it should manifest itself?
Yeah, I want my money in cash if the dollar's still the same when we get it. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. Anyway, I do believe that it has to be codified, right? And we're not talking about programs and initiatives that should already exist, because this is not going to come from the goodwill and desire of the system, right? We have to make a legal demand, and that has to be codified. So I do believe that this is a good step in the right direction of codifying that demand, and having it there for the students upcoming in the next generation. I don't know how long it's going to take. I'm one that I don't like to wait past 60 minutes. So, you know, this is hard for me looking at all of these things unfold, and it's like, is this going to be 3 to 5 years? I hope that it is not. But we will continue to pursue, and I support that pursuit.
I'd agree, and I agree and support. I think a lot of conversations are going back to, you know, poverty, right? But I think that those of us who have achieved in spite of also deserve some stake in this as well.
It's a fascinating conversation that you're leading at the Berkeley Unified School District, and I'm curious, who's paying attention to the conversation?
Right now, everyone. Everyone is paying attention to the conversation. Both supporters and naysayers are paying attention to the conversation, and they are voicing their opinions about the conversation. I'm talking about people in Berkeley and some people outside of Berkeley. But I think the question, Dr. Fortune, is who should be paying attention?
Oh, that's good.
And I think who should be paying attention is definitely here, everyone in the state of California and everyone nationwide should be paying attention. Now, in terms of some of the naysayers, folks are saying, well, that's out of the school district's jurisdiction. The school district shouldn't be focused on that. However, when we continue to see our students at the bottom and at the top of every single thing, the school district should be paying attention. We have naysayers who say, well, if you do this, then you're not supporting GATE programs, or you're not supporting the academically gifted, and we're taking away from those resources. But here's the thing that I love about equity work. It is not a zero-sum game. So what we do for our Black and African American students does not mean that we stop doing our STEM programming. It does not mean that we stop doing our additional equity work. What we will do, because Berkeley will do this, but what we will do for Black and African American students will not just support our Black students, but it will support everyone. There's an old saying that says that what is good for Black children is good for everybody. And I wholeheartedly believe that. So to answer the question, Dr. Fortune, everyone should be paying attention.
I love that. So as we come to a close with our panel, I want to give each panelist an opportunity to respond to this question, and that is, what should we do next? And let me give you the context for the question. We are sitting here on May 5th, and in about 10 days, the governor will release his May revision, and we will find out what he does with his equity multiplier. The Black in School Coalition, which inspired the name of this panel, has put in a proposal for an alternative equity multiplier, and it is being paid attention to. It actually was named by Education Trust West as one of the top 8 equity proposals in the legislature this year. And what it says is that rather than distribute this $300 million on the basis of income, because what happens is that only 5% of the money goes to Black kids. So instead of $533 million, which would have been the result in ongoing funding if he had signed AB 2774, which was the inspiration for the governor's equity multiplier, Black students would only get $16 million. So from $533 million to just $16 million. So what we are saying is that instead of basing it on income, because actually Black students, although some of our lawmakers believe all Black people are poor, actually Black students are not in the majority in the highest poverty in schools in California. Latino students are. And then it's followed by white students. And then it's because Black students are such a small proportion of the population in California, only about 6%, only about 5% show up in these low-income schools. So we're saying instead, look at the California State Dashboard, which is the way in which California measures public school performance, and any group that is not already funded, that is below the state average on 2 indicators on that dashboard, ought to be included in this equity multiplier. They ought to be the subject of it. So we'll find out in 10 days if the governor adopts that approach, or if he continues on the path where he's on, or if he withdraws the money altogether, citing California's budget deficit. So the clock is ticking. Christina Laster, what do we do next?
So everybody that is listening to this who knows a Black child, has a Black child, lives near a Black child, or has grandchildren even, this is not a far removed issue. If your children are out of the house and you have grandchildren and you have a Black child neighbor, so that means all of you need to be reaching out to make a demand, right? It's a fiduciary responsibility that the governor equally protect Black children, and we see for the past 20 years that hasn't happened. Other children have progressed and black children are still at the bottom, and so we need to make a demand, okay? And then the other thing that I would like to say, that the deficit is not in our children, and so parents that are having challenges and don't understand how to navigate these governance structures and the system can reach out to the National Action Network. This is part of what the Education Taskforce does, is train around know your rights. And so reach out to us, and we're more than glad to help you out.
Thank you so much. Tinsea, what should we do next?
I think we need to keep showing that this is not something that is lighthearted or something that we're suggesting, but continue to apply pressure, continue to demand that this is something that is actually a need and not just a want or a desire. And also, this is not something that's just going to be written on paper. This is for students like me, students like her children or your sons and daughters, and that this is something that truly will have an impact and a positive one.
Dr. Bishop?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say it, at the end of the day, if the state of California can't do what it needs to do for black children, we need to sue the state of California. That's what it is.
Director Brown?
I think what we need to do next and what we need to continue to do is make noise about this. When I first learned about the Black in School Coalition and I first learned about this work, there was one article that was written about what the governor had done. And now there are more articles that are written, but not a lot of folks know about it. And so it looks like calling on our electeds, it looks like calling on our school board members, it looks like calling on our school districts to advocate for and to ensure that this happens for our black students in the state of California, and ultimately happens nationwide. And that approach is not just, in the same way that you will let anyone know about all your business on Facebook, make this your business. Make this what you are focused on. Make this your story, your post, your highlight, what you talk about, not just in your own communities, but in other communities, because we know that this work also requires that we have some co-conspirators. It requires that we have allies as well. And so tell everyone you know and encourage them to tell 25,000 people every single day about this work, because it will only happen with advocacy and if we make noise.
So I want to give you a resource to push, and to push right now, to contact every member of the California Budget Committee who is in a position to respond to the governor's budget. Go to blackinschool.org. That's blackinschool.org. Take out your cell phone and go to blackinschool.org, and there's a call to action there. You can fill it out and send a message to your legislator and also every legislator who is on the budget committees of the state of California. And if I'm not mistaken, you can push a message to Governor Newsom as well. That's blackinschool.org for your direct action today. And if you're watching this online, I want to invite you to do the same. If you see it on a loop, it's never going to be too late. Even if it's past May 15th, this issue is going to continue until the budget is signed, which is June 30th if they're on time. I want to thank Christina Laster, the Hannan Western Region Education Director, Dr. Ramona Bishop, the President and CEO of Elite Public Schools, Tinsea Berhanu, who's from the Black Students of California United, and Khadijah Brown, Director of the Berkeley Unified School District Board of Education, for joining us today for this Black in School panel. Give yourselves a hand. Thank you.